Hello and welcome to another edition of the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show. Where this week we're super excited to have Max Flores on the show. We're going to get into some episodes this season. We're going to release this a little bit later than we are right now here in the spring, kind of talking about positional work, different things for different positions and things of that nature. So we'll talk some offensive line play today. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show is proudly sponsored by School Funder, AZ. School Funder, the only online fundraising company in America that lets you keep all of the money your team raises, except for the small 3% processing fee. Sound too good to be true? I thought so as well, but I can tell you firsthand, we use School Funder, and few short weeks we're able to raise $12,000, which we kept almost all of it, 3% processing fee. There are a number of companies that you would spend upwards of $2,000 not with School Funder. You wouldn't give away 20% of the wins your team achieves, so why give away 20% of the funds they raise? Please, School Funder AZ, let them know the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show sent you. That's SCHOOLFUNDR.org. All right, so we're going to dive right into the topic at hand, talking some offensive line play. We're going to talk it at obviously a little bit at a high school level, where we're talking about what we're looking for in establishing high school offensive linemen, scheme-wise, getting to some drill stuff, all sorts of stuff today on the show. But first question for our guests is, what do you look for in terms of attributes in a high school offensive lineman?
So I think for high school, size doesn't matter all that much. So that's something that's going to be overlooked a lot, or I think over analyzed a lot in high school, is that size means everything, and that's not true. I think what you do want to look for is a player who really just wants to learn. I think that offensive line is such a book of knowledge, whether it's plays or linebacker triggers or what the defense is going to do. I think that there's so much to do with who wants to learn, as well as quick feet. You want to look at some physical attributes. You definitely want to see quick feet. You don't want to see long steps between each step. And I would say definitely that the ability to learn is something that I think is the most important thing for an offensive lineman in high school. So
I would
But
say
what has given you the thought, or what's your experience that's shown you size isn't as crucial at the high school level?
Well, I mean, I played with guys in high school. I mean, I'm a little biased because our offensive line when I played at Prescott High School was pretty large, but we had a couple guys mixed in there, especially my freshman year. We had a player who was very, very small for offensive line next to me, and he was probably the best on our freshman squad. So I just don't think that that's necessarily something that's. I think it's something that can be made up for in high school. You don't have to be the biggest because you can make up for it in other ways, such as knowing what the defense is going to do. That's how I succeeded in college, is that I wasn't the biggest guy going into my college room, but I figured I could be better at everybody else in the room at learning the defense and learning what the defense is going to do, and I made up for it. So
I think one of the important aspects when you're talking about an offensive lineman at any level is somebody that's unselfish, somebody that kind of realizes the attributes like we've talked about at the position is really fundamentally sound, like you alluded to. Definitely somebody that's very technique driven, because you can make up for certain things at the high school level with the ability to have good technique. And you kind of have to know where, I think another important factor is knowing where you can lose.
for sure.
There's certain plays that are non-negotiables, or this. The guy can't cross your face or what have you. If you get driven back but he doesn't cross your face, we're going away from you, it's not necessarily the end of the world. I think you kind of have to know some of those aspects and different things like that in playing offensive line. So moving on to the next question, do you think, and obviously there's schools that have made this work at both styles of play. Coach Flores played at Northern Arizona University very successfully. A lot of different things that I can go both ways on this. We run a little bit of outside zone, but obviously primarily a gap scheme team. Do you think at the high school level you can get really, really good at gap and zone? And what do you think is more advantageous at the high school level, or does it depend on your personnel? Such factors like that. Gap scheme, zone scheme.
I think that I actually wrote something down that I wanted to say. I think gap is really good for unexperienced running backs and experienced offensive lines. And I say that because gap is really the running back's got a place that he's supposed to hit. He is supposed to go B gap, C gap, depending on what play we're running. Versus zone is good for unexperienced O lines, but experienced running backs because if our middle linebacker does this, you do this. So there's a lot of reading an offensive line and running back when you're playing zone. And so going back to the original question, I don't think that you have to have a bunch of schemes that overcomplicate things. I think you can get away with just having 2 or 3 plays, zone or run, or what am I saying? Zone or gap, and do it well. I don't think that there's too much that you need to do with adding plays and adding plays. I mean, if you run the same 3 plays just in different formations, I think they look different to the defense. And so what I would say is that I do think the reason I think zone is good for unexperienced offensive lines because the rules don't change for the offensive line. You're either going to double team to one guy, or you're going to double team the other guy, or you're on your own. Versus gap, there can be a little bit more depending on front and what the defense shows and kind of the gameplay of what can happen in gap. And there's a lot more moving parts in gap, I think. So
Now, hot button question of the day. Cody about threw me through a wall yesterday over this topic. Is duo gap or zone?
I it's right in between. I would classify it as gap because when I played in college, we used our gap. We used our gap double team words, so trained into calling it gap.
Would definitely agree with that. I think it's definitely a gap scheme play. I think it's essentially like a lot of people call it power without a puller. So that's my belief. I could see how people could classify it as zone, just not something that I would do. Next question is one that I've really been looking forward to chatting about a lot. For example, I've changed this a ton. I used to teach, and we're talking about gap scheme combos right now. So I used to teach where we would close the door and we were trying to get vertical movement on the down lineman, and then one guy would slide off. Almost similar to how you see teams do it on duo, as a matter of fact. And now we'll teach the inside guy. He's going to pick it up, set it down. This guy is turning his shoulders more, but he is going here and he's doing what I call a 3-step progression. So if I was the right tackle and I am comboing a 3 technique here inside, I'm almost going to give a little bit of ground with my left foot. Second step, get it on the ground. And I want my third step to make contact with the hand on the hip and my shoulder into the rib cage on a 3-step progression. Very similar to what you would see guys talk about when they're talking about tackling, near foot, near shoulder, that type of thing. But the question is, do you think it's easier to get vertical movement or lateral movement? And I'll just preface it by this. The reason I went to this is when you weren't super big, I have found it so much, even when you are big, I found it a lot easier to get lateral displacement than it can be to get vertical displacement. So question is, gap scheme, what do you think is more important, getting vertical movement or lateral movement?
I think the college offensive lineman in me would say vertical. I think vertical is always the way to go because that way you're not displaced when the linebacker triggers. So if I'm like you said, the right tackle on a gap scheme going to the right and my left guard's pulling to my right, that linebacker is not going to stay put. However, I think you can beat that with a good pull. But what I would say is that the horizontal movement is definitely more. I think it's easily achieved, coached correctly, and coached. It's easier to coach, as well as I think it's more violent, especially for younger guys that just need to get guys out of the way. I think it takes a little bit technique to get people horizontal than vertically, and it doesn't have to be repped as much. And also there's less room for getting shed and the defensive lineman getting in between the two of you if one guy is just made to hang up the defensive lineman and the next one is just made to push him. So I think that I would say vertical movement is probably better. I don't want to say better because I think that's a loose term, but um, it's more proper. However, I think just getting the guy out of the C gap, the B gap is.
I tend to agree with that. I think, like I said, I do think it's easier to coach the lateral movement. I think if you can get the vertical movement, it's always preferred to some degree, but I do think it's a lot easier for some kids to achieve that lateral displacement. The one thing I would say is obviously when you turn your shoulders, it's going to be more difficult to get up to a linebacker level. However, the reason that I've kind of liked it is let's say you're playing an even split, which a lot of people call 4-2, 4-4, whatever you want to call it. The tackle's the one turning his shoulder, and we try to keep the guard square. So that way, if the backer triggers, the guard can just step into his gap and he's fine. Whereas if you have them kind of both turning your shoulders, it can be a thing there.
Yeah, I think it also has to do with a lot with personnel. I'm sure too on the defensive line. If you have a dog sitting in the B gap, turning your shoulders and just getting him out of the way might be the better idea, especially if they don't have a world record defensive or linebacker.
100%. Well, and as we've talked about with kids, if we tell them linebackers are like buses. If you miss one, there's another one coming. So, and the thing about linebackers is as long as you prevent run throughs, you're still going to probably have a positive play. The run throughs is what I think will kill you. If you have those TFLs, and I think that's why you see so much duo at the higher levels, is because I do think even at the higher levels, gap scheme has the ability to spring a long run more, but you don't see many TFLs with duo because you're not creating a gap on the offensive line by pulling somebody,
For
which
sure.
I think is an interesting element of it. So next question, which I've definitely changed in my coaching career on this. I think early in my career, we probably had way too many schemes. We had way too many. We were trying to get good at too many things. And as I've maybe grown as a coach, we've certainly shrunk our run menu, so to speak. But how many schemes do you think the normal high school offensive line can execute well?
I think it really does go back to your offensive line's ability and want to learn, but I really only think two, maybe three are, I would say three, and then at the very minimum two is important to be successful, whether it's a power and a run or something like that. But I mean, I think my year we showed that we had a bunch of schemes and we only ran two or three of them over and over and over again because we were really good at them. I think we ran counter 7 touchdowns in one game. So I think that two or three is a good number. I honestly am in the boat of the more the merrier, which is sounds like the approach you used to take. Um, but I also think during the season you find out what you're good at. You can't replicate live reps in a game like you can in practice. I mean, you can try as hard as you can, but especially at the size of our school, we were two platoon or not two platooning. We were some of our best defensive players were also some of our best offensive players. So it's hard to replicate the game speed that you'll see on a normal Wednesday afternoon versus what you're going to see on a Friday night at 7 o'clock.
What was your preference, or did you have a favorite to run?
I was a really good down blocker in high school. I think that I really enjoyed down blocking, so I preferred power my way. I played left tackle, so power to the left. Because I also had really good guards and really good tight ends to help me out too. I mean, I had 3 really good tight ends while I was in high school, as well as 2 really good guards. So it makes it easy when the guys around me are so really good.
Next question here. Are there things you can do to adjust your scheme if you're lacking in certain areas? If you're I've seen some teams that run some double wing that said they would just put a mauler at one tackle that all he had to do pretty much was down block.
I
But are
think
there adjustments you can make to your scheme to help your kids in areas maybe they're lacking?
I'm sure that there is, as well as I think it comes down to stance first. Um, where if you have a guy who naturally pops his shoulders up, I see this a lot. You can scheme to where you're just always putting your hand in the dirt, as well as if we're getting into the technical plays that are called. I think so. Um, I'll go back to college, but there was an offense that we played up in Idaho who had a guard who was really good at pulling, and so whenever they were going to pull him, they put him on one side of the line or the other. That was a pretty dead giveaway of where the play was going, but it worked for them, and I think that that's something that they schemed and they schemed well because they knew what they were good at. They had a guard that was really big and couldn't pull, and they had a guard that was, more athletic and could pull. And so I know that's more not necessarily a scheme thing, but I think you can scheme for it. I think that teams know what they're good at, and again, I think it takes almost not a season, but a couple games to find out what they do need to scheme and what they do need to scheme away from because um, what is true will show on Friday night. So
I have to go unlock the gym, so I'll cut all this out. But I'm just going to mute and turn my camera off, and then you guys can just go till you're done, and then I'll trim it up so that way it looks nice and neat. But
sounds good.
All right, so moving on to the next question is what do you think is the most important position up front on the high school offensive line or any offensive line, really? Obviously at the NFL you're going to probably say left tackle. I don't know. It depends on the offense in high school whether that's in that boat. But what do you think is the most important spot?
So I think high school me definitely would have said left tackle, and I think that's only because that's what I played. Um, but my offensive line coach in college, Coach Conley, actually, he made a really good point that I had never really thought of, and I actually do now think it's center. I think the center is the most important piece, not only because of the communication aspects, but your center can make up for both your guards or your tackles being inadequate. And I say that because, especially in a 4-3 defense, somebody's going to be left alone. And especially as a guard, because I played guard and center in high school, you're always thinking, or in college, you're always thinking, how can I help my center? Because that's the fastest way to the quarterback, is that if there's a defensive tackle, he's the closest man to him. And so having a good center that can one-on-one a defensive or a nose can free up a guard to help a tackle or can free up a tackle to help a guard. So I think that would probably be the most important position just because of the ability to change the dynamic of your offensive line. You can, if you have a good nose or a good center who can handle a nose, it frees up a lot of room for the guard and your tackles to get to who they're supposed to get.
I think at the high school level particularly, one of the things it's interesting is not necessarily the most important position because I think that can change depending upon your scheme. I think if you are a primarily off tackle team, you want to have tackles that can get that movement, whether it's vertical or lateral movement. The one
Sure.
thing I'll say about, and I was talking to my uncle about this the other day, a longtime offensive coordinator, and one of the things I think his teams have always done well that I haven't done well is they blended gun and under center schemes really, really well. I think now we're so like most teams. I would say 80-90% of our snaps are out of the shotgun. So if you don't have that established, you don't have anything, no matter what. You could be blocking the heck out of people, but it doesn't matter if the snap is erratic and all over the place all the time. So I think that skill, getting somebody that maybe even if it isn't the most dominating blocker, particularly if you're a gap scheme team, because if you're a gap scheme team, if it's an even front, you're going to have your center block away a lot. And if it's an odd front, he's going to get the opportunity to combo. He's going to get help in certain situations. So I think probably the skill of snapping the balls is with the way teams are, mostly in the gun now, is probably the most important. Position-wise, I think it can depend a little bit. Obviously, I like to think you can kind of train guards. I think you need to have a little bit more beefiness and ability in your tackles. Not that you don't need that in the guards. That's not what I'm saying. But I think the tackles at the high school level are really, really important. And I would say the skill of snapping the ball is.
Yeah, I definitely say that the skill of snapping the ball is very important. Because I mean, every year you see games change just on one snap. You know, it could be a safety, it
100%.
could be a loss of down, it can be a fumble and a turnover. It just every year it happens.
So next question here is something that I've thought about a lot, and we've refined as we've gone through it a little bit, is drill sequence and building on the basics. I think if your drills don't show up on Friday night, I don't want to say they're a waste of time, but I'm not sure if they're the right drills if you can't find them on the film. So we've tried to match our drills to your scheme, whatever your scheme is. I think you have to kind of match your drills to your scheme. But how do you go about sequencing drills and building on the foundation of your proper footwork, hand placement, all those type of things?
So I really liked what we did in high school. And we actually did this, or so what we did in college, and actually we did this in high school. I just had never really thought about it in this way. Is that um, every morning before practice even starts, you're warming up your feet. We called it little things because little things equate to the big things. And so little things was your first two steps of any combo or any block you're going to make, whether it was a kick step, whether it was zone steps, whether it was a down step. It didn't matter. We were warming all of that up. And so something that I came to learn is that your feet are more expensive than your hands because your feet can cost you your hand placement. So if my feet are in a horrible place, my hands are not going to end up in a good place either. But I can have good hand placement and mess up my feet, or sorry, backwards. I can have good feet placement and mess up my hand, and I'm still in front of the defensive lineman. It just might be harder for me. So in order for drill sequencing to kind of join into this conversation is that we always started with our feet. So when it goes with little things, we always started with our feet in the morning. Um, the first drill we always did was warming up our feet. Didn't matter what it was. So we would start with the little things, and then we'd do team warm up, and then first indie session was moving our feet. And I think just picking them up, putting them down, getting them quick, going where we're supposed to go, and then we would tie our hands into it. Just because our coach knew as well is that if you were in bad foot position, your hands are never going to be in the right place. And so, and that shows up on film all the time. You'll see a guy with his feet 5 feet behind him and his hands 2 feet in front of him, and he's not blocking anybody. He's face down on the dirt. So, those things did show up. And from my short stint of coaching middle school football, the team that I helped out with, you saw it a lot. You see kids that get their feet in really bad positions and just throw their hands out in front of them, and they don't end up blocking anybody. But you see a kid get his feet under him, and he doesn't even have to hit the kid with his hands. He's still in the way.
So next question here, and I at the high school level, I firmly believe you need one protection. If you want to call it two, because it's the same thing both ways, half man, half slide. I've seen teams win state championships with half man, half slide. And that's something that I think probably is under coached at a lot of high school levels. I know I don't do as good a job in pass pro as I think I do in the run game stuff. But my question is to you, what was the biggest difference in pass pro schemes? Because honestly, you'll see a lot of very similar run concepts from the high school to the college to even the pro level. I do think the protection schemes are quite a bit more complex at the upper levels. And there's some high school coaches that have a number of different protections. So what were the changes you saw in that regard in terms of protections? How many protections did you guys carry while you're in NAU?
For drop back protections, I think we had three, and we introduced one mid-season, so four. I would say I went through four while I was in college. But what I would say is I do only think you need one in high school. I don't think that there's need to overcomplicate things, especially on a team where we did not drop back that much. My high school teams, we didn't drop back much at all. So I would say the biggest change from high school to college was linebacker ID. Linebackers are huge in college for IDing when you're doing pass pro, and I just don't think that was as emphasized when I was in high school, just because we had a running back that could bail us out if a linebacker came. However, defenses in college, I'm sure they're like this in high school as well, but there's a lot of blitzes made to defeat certain coverages. So we had a third down protection, and we knew kind of um, what blitz packages or what kind of stunts to see based on third down that would try and beat that protection, and we could try and beat them at their own game. So I think linebacker ID and linebacker keying, I mean, it was always you're focusing on the 4 down guys, 3 down guys. But with eyes to the second level, just because you had no idea what was going to happen. Um, so I think that the linebacker ID was the biggest change from high school to college.
Probably agree with that. When I worked at Red Mountain, obviously Coach Wisniewski had coached a ton at the college level, and we were a ton on identifying this linebacker. This was the base. The base was this guy. And we probably don't do that as much because, quite frankly, in looking at most of our stuff's off play action, or nakeds or those type of things. So we didn't have a whole lot of drop back. But when I was at Red Mountain, we had a ton. So that linebacker ID was really, 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 really important, and probably didn't do that quite as much. So next question here is, what do you think were the drills that helped you pass pro wise? Obviously, inside at center, not as hugely important, I would say, to be great in pass protection, because a lot of times you're going to get help depending upon the scheme and different things like that, and depending upon the front and those type of things. But what do you think the drills were, and what do you think technique-wise are the most important in being the best possible pass protector you can be?
So I think it has a lot to do with shoulder position. So in high school, I think I was watching a lot of pros like Joe Thomas, where they had really unorthodox stance and maybe leaned forward a lot in their pass pro, and I thought that was cool, so I tried to replicate it. It didn't work particularly well, but it didn't go as poorly as it should have. But I think I made up with it for my size. So I think the drills that helped me most weren't necessarily technical drills. It was mostly just repping it, full line twists and stunts and all kinds of stuff. That helped me both in high school and in college. We did that a lot in high school. For individual drills, I did really like putting if I was playing left tackle, I'll go to left tackle, putting my right foot um, on a line marker, like the 25-yard line, and keeping my foot on it while I was kicking, because we did a lot of vertical setting. We didn't do a lot of horizontal setting in high school. So I did really like the vertical set drill and really just try and keep my shoulders in position because I had a tendency to lean forward just because I thought it looked cool. Uh, and so I think, again, getting your feet in position, kind of what we were talking about earlier, I think getting your feet in position is the most important. And so just repping that kick step and being in front of somebody walk alongside of me or run alongside of me so I can picture myself blocking them. You can even just block them with your feet. I mean, you can get away with just good feet, stand in front of a guy rather than just putting your hands on him and letting him do whatever he wants to do, because I can get totally turned around that way.
I think that's something there's such a balance in different things in trying to get good at certain techniques and certain things at the high school level. I know there's a lot of times that I've overemphasized. I don't know if I would say overemphasized, because we did run the ball a lot, but there's only so many things I think in a practice you can get good at and establishing those things. But last question here is meeting time, film time. What do you think is most important for guys to be getting coached up on? And what do you think about film is really valuable for the high school offensive lineman? And maybe what do you think is not quite as valuable for an offensive lineman at the
Particular things that you see on film that can be value or unvaluable.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So I would say watching yourself if you have the opportunity to. Obviously, we filmed all of our games. I don't know what practice is like now, but in college it was big on filming practice and watching practice. I think being realistic with yourself. And so I almost had an idea of when I was in high school of like, I'm just going to watch what I do well. And then, during the week, I'll figure out what I'm doing incorrectly. I think that's a total wrong ideas to have about film. I think film is supposed to be looked at as a grade on a test. Oh, I did this well, but I did this poorly, so I need to work at what I'm doing poorly. So I think watching yourself is probably the most important thing you can do with film. So if I play a game, seeing that on every gap scheme, my tackle and my guard are getting split, it means we got to work on it. Um, versus and figuring out why that is. You can see on film either my feet are too far back or my guard isn't giving me the shove I need, or we're too far apart, or whatever it may be. I think that's the most important part of film. I don't think watching film on another team I find is very, very important as well, but I don't find it as important as realizing what you're poor at and what you can get better at. So I think they're equally as important, but I do think that watching yourself and knowing what I do well and what I do poorly on film um, will help me more than just knowing that I have a big defensive lineman in front of me who likes to swim move. Um, because it all does come down to your particular technique. While you can watch film and find out what you need to cover up for the next week, in terms of like if we have a really good defensive lineman or a really good linebacker that we're going to be facing, um, I think if what we used to say in college too is if it's to be, it's up to me, and so it doesn't necessarily what the defense is. It doesn't really matter what the defense is doing. What I'm doing is really going to dictate how the game goes.
I love that. So definitely a focus on what you're doing well and what you can improve on. Most importantly, is certainly a really good coaching point. So, Coach, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I could probably talk offensive line play all day. We're going to be doing a little few more of these episodes, so we're going to be talking positionally about different things. I want to thank Coach for his time, and we will see you the next time on the Blue and Gold Gridiron Show. So have a good night, everybody.